Hello there, my name is McHorse, and welcome to another Blockbuster tips video. In this episode, I'll show how to acquire, configure, and use BB gun. I'll be using latest versions of my mods at the moment, which are Blockbuster 2.2.2, MacLib 2.2.2, and Metamorph 1.2.6. So what is a BB gun? BB gun is an item in Blockbuster mod, which is very similar to Model Block, which can shoot custom projectiles by right-clicking when holding it. The cool thing about BB gun, it has so many configuration options, which should give you the flexibility to use it creatively in many ways. So, to get a BB gun item, you need to either search its name in the main creative tab, or find an empty item in Blockbuster's creative tab, called BB gun. Next thing we need to do is to set up a keybind for BB gun configuration GUI, which can be done in options controls. After setting up a keybind, hold a BB gun in your main hand, and press the keybind we just configured, to open the configure gun menu. In the configuration GUI, you'll find 4 different panels: fire, projectile, impact and transformation panels, and also a lot of different options in these panels. A lot of these fields are interconnected, so we'll be jumping in between panels a bit, but let's start with visual properties first. Default morph buttons allow you to pick and edit which morph to be used in the hand. Meanwhile, firing morph buttons allow you to pick and edit a morph, which will show up in the hand briefly after firing the BB gun. This brief duration, in ticks, can be configured by adjusting the delay field. If delay is 0, the firing morph will never be used. So with this feature, you can make a gun whose charging handle goes backward when firing. Here is an example. You can get creative here using animated poses. For the rest of remaining features, we'll need to configure projectiles morph first. When you use BB gun, even in default state with no projectile morph, it will always shoot a projectile. We can confirm it by pressing F3+B to enable entity hitboxes. The projectile morph buttons, in the projectile properties panel, allow you to select which morph will be used for the projectile itself. And finally there is also an impact morph buttons, which allow you to change the morph of the projectile for a brief moment when the projectile hits an entity, or when it bounces off the blocks, which is similar to firing morph option. You can configure the duration of impact morph as well, with impact delay field. Similar to delay option, if impact delay is 0, then impact morph will never be used. Now let's go back to fire properties. Scatter field allows you to configure how accurately the projectiles will shoot. 0 means it will shoot projectiles exactly at crosshair, and the bigger the number, the more inaccurately it will shoot. By itself, scatter value isn't useful, but with projectiles field, it allows you to create a shotgun, where multiple projectiles are being shot in different directions. Every one of these panels, beside transformations panel, has a command field. Command on fire executes a command from the bullet's perspective when it gets fired. Command on impact executes a command from the bullet's perspective when it hits something or bounces off. It also supports special variables. X, Y and Z variables will be replaced with the block position of the block that was hit, which is different from relative tilde block position, which can be used in the commands, which will provide an adjacent block position instead. And finally command on tick executes the command every n ticks, configured by ticking field. So if you set ticking to 10 ticks, it will execute given command every half a second, since there are 20 ticks in a second. Now we're ready to jump into projectile properties panel. Speed defines how fast the projectile travels. This field is a multiplier for a default speed of about 20 blocks per second. Inputting tool will result in linear speed of 40 blocks per second for projectile. The speed field also affects the launch player option in the fire panel. What launch player option does is instead of firing a projectile or multiple projectiles, it fires the player instead. This could be used in a number of ways to simulate a push or pull of an actor. Positive speed will make the player leap forward. Negative speed will make the player push backward. This could be used for thugs being kicked into the wall, superhero leaps, etc. Friction field allows you to give the projectile air resistance. It's a multiplier which acts on velocity of projectiles every tick. If the value is below 1, it will make the projectile slower with every tick. If the value is above 1, it will make the projectile exponentially faster. Gravity field allows you to set a vertical factor which will be subtracted from the velocity every tick. The bigger the value, the faster it goes down. If the value is negative, then instead of falling, the bullet will float away into the sky. Hitbox X and Y fields allow you to set up projectiles' hitbox size. X field determines the width and the depth of the hitbox, and Y field determines the height. Lifespan field determines for how many ticks the projectile will live. As a reminder, there are 20 ticks in a second, so default 200 ticks lifespan is 10 seconds. Yaw and pitch toggles enable projectile rotation, either on vertical or horizontal axes, respectively. Fade in and out fields allow you to specify for how long, in ticks, projectile appears and disappears. And finally, in projectile panel, there are sequencer and random toggles, which are connected. If you pick a sequencer morph for the projectile morph, it will use its sequences. If you specify more than one projectile, consequent projectiles will pick next sequence in order, and if you'll enable random toggle, then a random morph will be picked from the sequencer morph. Moving to impact panel, damage field allows a projectile to hurt entities. The value here is specified in half hearts. If you want to kill a zombie or a creeper with one shot, input 20 for damage. Bounce toggle determines whether a projectile bounces off after hitting a block, while factor field, below it, determines a bounce multiplier which will multiply the velocity after a bounce. Values below 1 will weaken the consequent bounces, while values above 1 will exponentially accelerate the velocity after every bounce. Hits field allows to specify how many bounces it requires for the projectile to lose its bounciness. Vanish toggle allows to kill the projectile after hitting a block or an entity. When enabled, it will use the value from hits field to account after how many bounces to disappear. In addition, vanish delay option determines after how many ticks the projectile will disappear, after it was marked for vanishing. And finally, sticks option allows you to stick projectiles onto blocks instead of bouncing off. This toggle completely ignores bounce or vanish toggles. In addition, penetration factor allows to determine how much out of the block projectile will stick out in block units. Negative values will sink the projectile into the block. And finally, it's the time for transformations panel. This panel is quite straightforward. The left part of the screen, under Gun Transformations label, allows you to configure the position, rotation and scale of default and firing morphs in your hand. You can preview how it looks in the third person in this viewport area, but also how it looks in the first person in the background. While the projectile transformations part of the screen allows you to specify position, scale and rotation of the projectile and impact morphs relative to the projectile. The dot is anchor point, and green line shows in which direction the projectile will be oriented and fly. And now, before I'll show you a couple of examples, let me tell you about the main limitation. Projectiles are fired from the entity's head. I haven't found a way to make the projectiles to shoot out of the gun itself. Now let's get to examples, shall we? Rocket or grenade launcher requires two distinct option changes, an impact command which spawns a prime TNT without fuse time, and some particles spawned by the ticking command with a high frequency. You can use particle morph as well. As for rocket launcher, just remove the default gravity, and it will work. Flamethrower can be configured like a shotgun, but upon impact spawn fire blocks with on impact command, and we could probably add some flame particles. With a trick from how to attach an item tutorial, you can throw items like daggers and axes, and other stuff, and it would stick to the wall. You can also try adding a spinning animation, using sequencers. Add an impact morph of the final position. Change the impact delay to an enormous number, and finally enable stick option as well, and that should be pretty much it. Now let's splash some blood on the wall. For this BB gun, I'll use little flat colored red block morphs, adjust a bit the speed and make them stick. Looks pretty cool for horror machinimus. And final trick. You can use sequencer and random option to create an effect of multiple people flying away from something like an explosion. Set up a sequencer morph with a single Fred or Alex model morph with some skin, and then duplicate it a couple of times and change every morph to a unique skin. Here I used a Machinima Hub skin pack for different skins. Final touch will be to specify the number of sequences in the projectiles field, and add some scatter. Once I'll fire the gun, you'd see lots of characters flying away in different directions. It could work well with superhero stuff. I hope you're feeling more comfortable using BB gun now. Give it a lot of practice, and I'm sure you'd be able to use it much freely. There are so many things you can do with BB gun, which is impossible to show all of that in this video, but hopefully my examples gave you some ideas. Thanks for watching, and make sure to check out BBC's Sherlock, it's very good.